the Southway that we must as well, as Indigenous peoples and as peoples, take care of the resource. We take care of the resources our elders tell us, the resource will come back. So with that, on behalf of the Scopish, I'm going to welcome you all, and I'll pass it on to my sister Leah to offer greetings on behalf of the slave of the Ocean.
It's not all my trouble.
It's difficult for our people here to exercise those Section 311 constitutional rights. It's difficult to do that here, where I live today. Go over to the Fraser River where our relatives are. That's where we get sometimes. We say that it's really important for this world to protect salmon, because salmon is what has sustained us as a race. Salmon is what has all of our people in nature, not just down here, but we're going to hear from our relatives from up river, and they'll tell me how important the salmon is to them, how important the salmon is to all of us. And I'm not even talking about the livelihood that our relatives are themselves doing. We're just talking about enough food for our families to make it through the winter. We're just talking about having enough fish so that our people can continue to eat the traditional food that our people have eaten from their land. I don't want to live in a world without salmon. I don't want to live like that either. So we need to, we're already some and calling on our MPs and the DFO ministry to do the work that's required to bring the state along salmon.
I know it's not really good. Yes, yep.
We have Musqueam. First of all, I'd like to introduce myself. Sorry, Chief Wade Sparrow, Musqueam First Nation, traditional name of the Yaqua. I want to thank my cousins, my aunt here. My late father was Thalakelton. My grandfather was Sienna. Come from a fishing community in Musqueam. I want to take this opportunity to raise my hands to each and every one of you for being here with us today. These fights that we have are all of our fights to make sure that we have fish for future generations. I want to acknowledge our leadership council for stepping forward. I want to take this opportunity to thank Bob for his hard work and dedication and bringing it to our attention. I see we have a few commercial friends in our presence. Who would have thought that in 1990 when the Sparrow decision came down? But it's good to see you guys all here for the interest of your kids, the next generations. And if we don't come together as a unified group, we'll be the ones that will be at the wheel when the dinosaurs disappeared. And we'll be telling our children that there used to be salmon in the Fraser River. We don't want to be those individuals. So I just want to once again pass on to Bob and the leadership to talk about the science. But just on behalf of our community, we just laid to rest Ron Sparrow on Friday from the Sparrow decision. And I just want to go on record from our community that's got a proven Aboriginal right that's proved in the courts, highest courts of this land, that the federal and provincial government do not follow the recommendations by the Conan Inquiry to deal with these situations, we will not hesitate to go back to court. And I want to say that we were asleep at the wheel for a while, thinking that those recommendations were going to be adhered to by the federal government. And if they're not going to be, like I said, that we're going to stand with our leadership all the way up and down the Fraser, and we will fight back, and we'll use the powers that we have. We've tried sitting at the table to try to get the governments to listen to us, and it's fallen on deaf ears. And if they continue not to listen to us, Musqueam is in a position to take a Sparrow 2 and extend on our rights that were proven in 1990. Aichka.
Thank you, Chiefs, for the welcome to the territory. We have a candle burning to honor the ancestors that have fought this fight for our people. I want to now welcome Regional Chief Terry Teegee via Zoom. So if you give me a moment, I got to shut the mic off and bring him up on the screen.
Deneza, Sekuza, Skyza, Chiefs, hereditary chiefs, and leadership. I just want to acknowledge the territory that I'm on, up the Fraser, the headwaters of where many of the Sorry about that. Sorry I couldn't make it up there. So I want to also acknowledge Bob Chamberlain and all the allies and chiefs who have come together for this very important matter in terms of really what we're talking about here is the collapse of the many species of wild salmon up the Fraser. And we're seeing this happen everywhere in the world, and really what is occurring here is the actions of human beings, and we can't change that. We can change our behavior. So there have been many court declarations, Sparrow, and I send my condolences to the Sparrow family in the recent loss of Ron Sparrow in that very important court case. The case of Marshall back east, Guerin decision, and more recently, the Huset court case that is currently in the courts and being appealed. So, and then there also has been many reports, including the Cohen Commission, where there has been 75 recommendations to raise awareness of open fish farming in the waters of the coast of British Columbia. which has a detrimental effect on many of the wild salmon species across British Columbia. So one in particular recommendation 4-23 had the assumption that DFO would be implementing the Cohen Commission recommendations with somebody at the helm and really directing and making sure that the recommendations are followed through, and having implementing a regional director general here in British Columbia. That never happened. $25 million was spent on implementing some of the recommendations. However, it hasn't gone far enough. And now we're coming up to the end of one of the recommendations is to transition away from open net fish farming by the end of September 30th, 2020, and we're nowhere near that. So we continue to raise these issues in light of the many stressors that many wild salmon across this province have been experiencing, and really in many effects it's a death by 1,000 cuts, whether it's climate change, open net fish farming, overfishing, or habitat destruction. So as we move forward, we certainly know that we have the ability to change our behavior, manage the wild salmon better, and so really requires partnership and perhaps a devolution of the Department of Fisheries and Oceans to really bring up our First Nations people and partner in a nation-to-nation fashion and management of the wild salmon. And as many of our leadership said previously, perhaps we'll be talking about salmon in light of really in light of extinction, and that's where we're heading. So it's important that we get this right, that we change our behavior, and we change our management practices, and we need to be full partners in management of wild salmon. So sorry about the not being there today. I certainly know that there's many issues with COVID right now, spreading all over the place. And lastly, I just want to state our support for the fishermen back east and the Mi'kmaq territory that are asserting their rights and then their treaty rights to harvest the many lobsters out there that they have rightful access to, much like we have here in British Columbia. So our fights are very similar. We're cut from the same cloth, and we're calling upon DFO to listen to Indigenous people across this land that we call Canada, from coast to coast to coast. So with that, I just want to say thank you much, Joe. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you. Thank you, Regional Chief. I'd like to invite up Cookby Judy Wilson and Robert Phillips from the First Nation Summit to come and speak and round out the First Nation Leadership Council. I believe Robert will speak first, and Judy.
Wait, Chukwinuk, Scotland. Robert Phillips, as mentioned, from the First Nations Summit with the First Nations Leadership Council in British Columbia. I too like to acknowledge the chiefs and council and spokesperson, as well as other chief and council in attendance, and hereditary chiefs and other participants, and those that have been helping along the way for many, many decades. The passing and celebration of life of Ronald Sparrow was very important. We acknowledge because of the Supreme Court of Canada decision in the Sparrow case. Without such a case, of course, we wouldn't be here today, and it's a very important precedent that has been set. We have Aboriginal rights and title. We have that right to fish. So unlike the little caps there, it doesn't say make America great again or anything to do with Trump. It says make salmon great again. So I want you, in case you didn't see that, right there in front. Also like to thank Bob Chamberlain for putting this together. I think it's very important that we come together as much as possible to help save our salmon, our wild salmon. It's very important. Minister Bernadette Jordan recently stated that the government supports the implementation of the Cohen Commission recommendations. We understand that there's a deadline of September 2020, and that is passing. We also understand it as minimum commitments, and it has to make sure that that the both provincial NDP and federal Liberals commit to phasing out open pen fishery. They made promises and they must uphold because of the UN declaration. Also, British Columbia has the declaration right, the DRIPA in British Columbia, that needs to be fully implemented. Inaction equals broken promises. And I wanted to emphasize that inaction not only means broken promises, but already as mentioned by Chief Leah, you know, our livelihood is at stake. The wild salmon is at stake. Our people are at stake. All of not only humanity, but all creatures are at stake if the wild salmon do not survive. It is time for the open net fishery to be canceled, to be phased out, and that all open net pen agriculture must be extended to the whole province by 2023, as promised. We are certain that moving salmon farming onto land in closed pens is a positive impact on the salmon population. We must make this happen now. So again, I'd like to thank Bob and all those that are in attendance, and just to think of all the sea lice that the data that's been there and that is killing the fishery, the salmon. I'm sure our experts will come up and give further detail. With that, I'd like to now call upon Cook B. Wilson.
Wait, Kakaitap, Hrisquest, Cook B. Judy Wilson from Nisconeth, from Secwepemc Ulu, which is the Shuswap Nation in the interior. We're one of the largest nations in the interior of British Columbia. I want to also acknowledge Dalton Silver, Chief Dalton Silver. He's our fisheries rep that couldn't make it today, and also our Grand Chief Stuart Phillip, who's always at the front of everything, and he's not able to be here today either. And acknowledge our Vice President, Chief Don Tom. But I'm one of the union representatives for the Union BC Indian Chiefs, and also serve on the First Nations Leadership Council. And I wanted to speak here today because what's happening with the collapse of the salmon. You know, we called it an emergency state for COVID. It's really an emergency state for the salmon in British Columbia. We're very much at war, similar to our Mi'kmaq relatives in the East, but this war is different because it's policy, legislation, and unilateral decisions being made by DFO and the federal government, and the government's ignoring the inherent rights of our nations, the proper title holders, and also ignoring the constitutional 35 rights, and ignoring the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. What government, what department has the privilege to ignore the law of the lands, especially ignore our Indigenous laws of our land? Because many of our nations are outside of the treaty process. So we've never ceded, relinquished, or surrendered any of our land or waters to the government. So I wanted to underscore the poor management and the unilateral decisions of DFO that impacted the sea lice that came into our waters through the open pen fish farms. It's not if or how. There's scientific reports that you'll hear here today that will show you poor management decisions. And we need DFO to vacate We need DFO to totally reform. We've done that with other ministries. We've done that with other departments. We've reformed the child and family laws of Canada and BC. We've reformed a lot of the health across Canada to benefit our people so that we could have what's called minimum standards of human rights in Canada and BC. That's what Bill 41 brings. It doesn't displace our Indigenous rights on the land. What it does is give us minimum human rights. And when a department fails so miserably as DFO, it's time the federal government says we need a reform here. It's not working. It hasn't been working for decades since the Cohen Commission. And their failure to implement the Cohen Commission is a testament of their failure for the overall fish management in Canada. And our people have been, like Chief Wayne Sparrow said, we've been saying, okay, you know, if you're going to manage, manage. But we cannot stand by when it's decimating our salmon fish stocks the way it is, because the salmon are part of our people. They're our way of life. The salmon are our people, our relatives, and we have close ties and origins of salmon in all of our nation stories. So we can't stand idly by when our relatives, the salmon, are being decimated and desecrated for the value of what? A few commercial fishery and for the government. We have to stand by our salmon people up and down the river for a time right now when the emergency state of our salmon in BC. It's happening right now. Our world-renowned Adams Lake salmon run, very little are coming back to our salmon spawning beds. And Trans Mountain is laying down anti-spawning mats in our territory. It doesn't make sense that DFO will allow a major corporation of pipeline to lay down anti-spawning mats in our territory and all along the territories up to the interior just for the pipeline and just for a few corporate interests. And also the DFO is allowing that and permitting those anti-spawning mats. But it goes same with the tankers that'll come into the inlet. Chief Leah spoke about that, how it's impacting the inlet here. We need to be able to say, we will stand by our salmon. We will honor the work that Chief Robert Chamberlain has done in uniting 101 of our First Nations across BC in saying that we are looking at closed containment, not open pen fish farming. That's got to stop, and that's got to stop now. So thank you for all coming here, and I honor our Tsleil-Waututh and our Squamish and Musqueam relatives here, and for making the way for us to speak for a few minutes. And also our proper title holders are here to say what's going on in their territories and how they are saying we have to change and how the salmon are uniting and bringing us together. Thank you.
So thank you, Leadership Council, for your remarks. I want to bring your attention to the screen because this represents 101 First Nations of British Columbia that support the Liberal government's commitment to transition open net cage fish farms to land-based closed containment by 2025. I can also report to you that out of the 42 MPs, I believe that's how many MPs are in British Columbia, 25 of them have signed a declaration supporting removing open net cage fish farms from the ocean to land-based closed containment. So consider that. The government has made 5 MPs of British Columbia support it. 101 First Nations of British Columbia support it. If this government decides not to transition fish farms out of the ocean, my question to the minister and my question to the Prime Minister is, who are you listening to? If you're not listening to the MPs of British Columbia and the vast majority of First Nations, then you are failing this country. You are failing wild salmon in British Columbia. And so as we were trying to get as many people and as few as people together for today, I want to invite up my family from the Stadtlium and the Ikepmuk to come and share their thoughts on wild salmon, the state that we face, because the Intlekapik and the Statlium are all on this list of 101 First Nations. So if I could invite my family to come forward and share some thoughts, that'd be wonderful.
Katwa Alap, and Snukdukwa, Colleen Jacob, and Squaticha, Kaklapukkan, Buta Statlium. Hello, my name is Colleen Jacob. I am the elected chief of Kaklap. Our community is one of 11 within the Statlium Nation. We have Squailuch, Hoiston, Klitkit, Shukalwash, and Quatqua, Lilwat, Shamakam, Shkatin, and Khakja. At Statlium, we have access to the salmon, either in the Mid-Fraser River and along the Lillooet Lake tributaries. Like most Indigenous people, we have relied on the sockeye salmon for our livelihood or survival for generations. We each have our own experiences or stories to share, and today I will be sharing a part of the Statlium and a part of the Kaklap people. I believe what we have is very special. Our people continue to use the lands according to an annual seasonal cycle. This includes fishing in the spring, summer, and sometimes into the fall. In northern Statlium, we live in an area where the landscape and weather are perfect for making dried salmon, or wind-dried salmon. This method has allowed our people to preserve the salmon in a way where we don't need freezers, and it has kept our people alive for generations. Our way of life, or as we call it, our Nklakmenshkasha, is connected to the land and play an important role in our identity. Fishing is a big part of our way of life. Fishing racks are usually shared amongst families, and as we work together, this allows us to spend our quality time with each other. The first day is usually spent by cleaning up the racks and repairing them if they need it. There are many first-time experiences that we have, whether it's our children catching their first salmon or making their first dried salmon. And we all have roles to play as we work together to get our winter supply. These are an important part of our experiences that could only be learned while being on the land, and in this case, down by the river. For Kaklap, our traditional fishing grounds are between 3 mile to 14 mile. None are accessible by vehicle. While a few have horses, but for the most part, it means us having to walk a long distance and hiking up a side of a mountain. We fish using dip nets, set nets, and small gill nets, and catch only what we can carry on our backs. It takes a lot of work and commitment, and our elders wanted us to keep our fishing the way that we have, the way that our ancestors have fished. And so they have set up our own fishing laws and licensing system that we follow. Our ties to the land go back to our shpatach, our old stories. There's one story of Inkiep, or Coyote, who brought the salmon up along the Fraser River. And while he was doing that, at Kaklap, at our fishing grounds, there's a footprint of Inkiep at Shechit. That's at 6 mile. And there's an imprint of his footprint and where he sat down and rested. And as he rested, when he was done, he carried on up north and brought the sockeye salmon up north. As far back as I could remember, my siblings and I have been taught how to fish, to make dried salmon, and to preserve in different ways by our mother. And I too have passed this on to my children. There's a real sense of pride in what we do. Since I've been elected, there have been 3 fishing seasons, and I've seen the challenges that our people have been through. And at times I am very sad, and my heart is heavy. We are being impacted each year, each generation. This has created a lot of hardship for our people. You know, it's a very difficult decision when we are expected to not fish and when our people have to make that decision to fish or not. In 2018, when there was a lot more fish, our people took extra, and there's many of our people that have tried to make it last for the next 2 years. There's many that have decided not to fish at all in these last few years, and others have decided to catch a very bare minimum. You know, in the past, our people have been told, I've been told that our people used to go down to the river as soon as school was out, and they would stay until school started again. So it was a whole summer that our families spent down the river. And as time went on, there's been less and less salmon. And at one point, our elders even told us that we should stop fishing the Stewart Run. And that's what we did. We actually implemented it into our fishing laws. And now our people have been cut back to August, and now we're expected not to fish at all. This has added to the uncertainty when our people need the food the most, especially in the middle of a pandemic. When we are expected to stop fishing altogether, it is clear how much our way of life is being impacted and in jeopardy. We need to take a serious look at what's happening and determine what needs to be done. And this year in Kaklip, what we have done is we've interviewed a few of our elders and members, and we'll be putting together a short documentary. And I understand that the situation goes way beyond our own community. And as many have pointed out, you know, we need to take a look at Canada's policies on management, or what I've heard some of our elders say, mismanagement of the salmon. And I also know that overfishing in the past has played a big part in where we are today. And I think we need to take another look at the concept of conservation and food social ceremonial, as well as the industrialization that's taking place and having an impact, including the Trans Mountain, Mount Poly, and now the ever arching climate change. You know, as a part of being here today, we do support the Cohen Commission, and that feel that Canada does need to implement the Cohen recommendations, including the transition from open fish farms to closed fish farms. And as it stated before, we do need to take a new look at how we do things. You know, when the Cohen Commission came to Lillooet, I wasn't on council, but I did attend, and I said a few words where I think that we need to change more to an ecosystem-based planning type of model, where we start to connect things to the land instead of seeing the economics as a theory. Tie it to the land, because that's where everything is tied to. You know, I really think the Cohen Commission needs to be revisited and reviewed, because before, when there was a collapse of the salmon, you know, this year was even worse. So we really need to take a new look at this Cohen Commission. And when it comes to sea lice, it's apparent that there needs to be a change. And we are part of the nation, a community that supports the removal of the fish farms as one way, only one way to bring the salmon back. And this needs to be done as soon as possible. We do need to work together to come up with a strategy on solutions and to carry those out to ensure the survival of the salmon, because really our way of life is at risk right now. Thank you. Takamanchukdukwa.
Good morning. My name is Debbie Abbott. I'm in Inlakatm. I'm Executive Director for Inlakatm Nation Tribal Council, as well as a member of Lytton First Nation Council. The Skaden, the fish, is the lifeblood of our people. And we have been involved in many issues that have come forward to give us a sense that we need to be involved to change the path. Back in the 1980s, we fought the CN from putting in a second track that would impact the fishway, the waterways for the fish. We've investigated landfills that contribute to the contamination of the waterways as well. And we've reviewed all of the various commissions that have happened over time. And it has not been in the best interest of Indigenous peoples for the outcome of those reviews. We really looked to the Cohen report, as was stated earlier, for the recommendation 19. The fish are in dire need of support. Grand Chief Bob Pascoe once said, you could go down the river any day, any given day, and take a fish. But what have you done for the fish? Back in 1992, July 10th, our chiefs made a decision to no longer fish the early Stewart so that our neighbors to the north would at least have some fish for their food. That's how drastic things have become. We have to look to all our neighbors on the Fraser River system and work together. We even tried to implement the Intertribal Fishing Treaty, a mutual respect for the resource, because that's what it's going to take for everyone to be on board to support the recovery of a very important resource for all aspects of our people. So we've become involved in the aspect of looking at the different impacts and how we can make recommendations to change those so that our future generations have something to look forward to and be involved in. As I said earlier, Skaden is the lifeblood of our people. I'd like to ask Don Sam, our fisheries manager, to say a few words as well. So thank you. Cooksham.
Direction 11, Nishquest Papco. Good morning. My name is Don Sam. I'm the fisheries manager for the Intlakatm Nation Tribal Council. As Debbie Abbott outlined, you know, the salmon is the lifeblood of our people. And we see the decline of the returning stocks over the last few years. We haven't fished sockeye in 2019. We haven't fished sockeye in 2020. We're looking at the impacts and we're working with the department and looking at ways of what science needs to be done, where the fish are, or why are the fish disappearing and not coming back. Just recently, we've been working with the Stetlium, our neighboring nation. We've been having some BC Interior Chiefs meetings where we have these discussions and look at these concerns. And we'd like to thank Bob Chamberlain for inviting us down to participate and bring some of these concerns forward. We know we have a lot of impacts of global warming, warm watering, temperatures, pollutants. The fish farms is another one. I know there's a lot of science being looked into it, and just wanted to say thank you for inviting us. Cooksham.
Thank you very much. If I could invite up our colleagues from the commercial fishing sector.
Good morning. My name is Dan Chabelle. I'm here in my capacity as a member of the Gulf Trollers Association, but I'm very active in industry affairs. I sit on the Commercial Salmon Advisory Board. I'm a member of the BC Salmon Marketing Council. I'm an Area H Harvest Committee representative, and I'm a director of the Pacific Prawn Fishermen's Association. The latest chapter in this journey began for us a couple months ago when we began receiving reports from fishermen who were identifying unprecedented lice loads on out-migrating salmon smolts. And they were identifying this in conjunction with researchers and scientists that were in the field. And we weren't entirely sure what to do, so we began reaching out to other sectors, and we spoke to our friends in the ENGO sector and to those in the recreational sector that had expressed interest. Thank you. In dealing with this issue. And then we were most heartened to hear that the Indigenous fisheries representatives had taken an active interest in this because, quite frankly, you have more political influence than we have, and we believe that if this was an issue for you, that it would be an issue for government, and we might actually make headway on a problem that's plagued the ecosystem for a few decades now. So in terms of my own personal experience, I just returned from Haida Gwaii a couple of days ago, and I brought my boat back from Prince Rupert to Vancouver. And one of the things that was clearly apparent to me, and this is not a great revelation, is that coastal and Indigenous communities along the coast, and I gather in the in-river areas, have been decimated over the course of the last few decades. And this decimation has coincided with the emergence of the open net pen salmon farming industry. And, I'm not smart enough necessarily to connect those dots, but it certainly is, as was identified by the Cohen inquiry, a smoking gun. And when we look at neighboring jurisdictions like Alaska, where they don't have open net pen salmon fisheries, they have vibrant coastal fisheries communities and healthy ecosystems and healthy salmon returns. We don't have that in British Columbia. And it just underscores the fact that the salmon is the canary in the coal mine, not just from an environmental perspective, but obviously from a socio-economic perspective. And while we're seeing developments and transitions in terms of our participation in salmon fisheries, my belief is that the First Nations have a very keen interest, just as the commercial and recreational sectors do, in the health and well-being of the salmon resource, because you're going to be playing a much more active role going forward. And it would be a sad irony if you were being offered increased participation in this area and you ended up with something that amounts to nothing. So I'm delighted that we're in this together, and I'm really hopeful that our efforts and our activities will go beyond this news release, and that we'll keep fighting the good fight until we get the attention of government. Given the announcement of a provincial election yesterday, I think it's a great time for us to reach out to our provincial candidates and ask them what they're going to do to help us in this regard. On that note, I don't want to belabor this. I want to hand the mic over to Paul Kershaw. I'm a hook and line fisherman. He's a net fisherman, so we represent different fishing approaches, but I think we have a common and shared interest. Thank you.
See, I can't work that stand. I'm just a fisherman. I'd like to thank Bob Chamberlain for inviting us to speak. Appreciate that a lot. I'm Paul Kershaw. I've fished for 46 years on the Fraser River. And my affinity with the salmon is a lot like Chief Wayne Sparrow said. I'm now here for my children. Somehow I got them into the fishing mess that probably a lot of us in this room got cement shoes in. I think the one thread that binds us all here is the wild salmon. It is not farm salmon from the Atlantic Ocean. These are Atlantic salmon. They're an alien species. They're concentrated in an open net fish farm, 600,000 to 1 million fish in a farm. And as a sports fisherman in Port Alberni once explained to me 20 years ago, you put a bunch of fish in a pen, in a water column that get a cold. The fish that swim by, they get a cold. They can feed the fish in the pen, medicine, and make them better. The fish swimming by, swim off and die. It's so simple, and I'm no scientist, but I think a lot of us, some of us have been working on this for 3 years, others have been here, like Bob, for 30 years, fighting the good fight. And we've kind of come to the point where everybody in British Columbia wants salmon. Well, you have to stand up for it. Bob's done it, Wayne's doing it, the rest of us here are doing it. But I'm telling you, those fish farms, I've watched it happen. My wife led a campaign in Port Alberni to make Alberni Inlet Fish Farm free. And we worked with a coalition of First Nations, sport, environmental, and the citizens of Port Alberni. And we actually got the 3-4 fish farms in the inlet out. It wasn't 4 years after that, we had a return of 1 million sockeye. You know, just lately we've had 3 consecutive runs of 1 million sockeye where First Nations, sport and commercial are all, you know, thriving on. And the last couple of years were not big years. This season, the Fraser River is predicted to be 1 million. Sockeye, what do we have? 300,000? I don't think it's that high, which is disgusting. Okay, Port Alberni had a prediction of 168,000. They got a return of 330,000. That is more than the Fraser River. The Solmass system is a babbling brook compared to the mighty Fraser. It's ridiculous to not see that when you remove the farms, the fish will come back. We are in a devastated point. I hate to be, no, I don't hate to be. I love to be passionate about salmon. You know, we feast on it. People in that city right there, they want to know there's salmon. They may never ever see one. We want to know we have them in our rivers. They've got to remove those farms from discovery to start. You know, we got to stop accommodating fish farms. They've got to get out. That's all I really wanted to say. Thanks.
Before we have our friends from the NGOs give some really good points about the pathogens, disease, and sea lice, I want to express to everyone, you have no reason to have any faith in the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, none whatsoever. The Cohen Commission, Justice Cohen, after $32 million, called out the DFO for being in a conflict of interest with their primary responsibility to look after the environment and wild fish and their promotion of fish farms. I've been involved in virtually every DFO process that's come down the road on policy and regulations, so I know what I'm speaking about. We got a letter back from Minister Jordan that pointed towards the Indigenous Multi-Stakeholder Advisory Body, IMAB, as what the outcome was to be a foundational piece to the Standalone Aquaculture Act. That process we refer to as IMAB was an absolute sham. There is nothing in the final report that points out to the true facts of science. We've learned with the release of a new science paper that a participant from one of the industry partners and a participant from DFO, they knew that they were lying at the IMAB process. Their paper was under review for publishing, and yet they maintained that Piscine reovirus is not Atlantic. And yet their own paper confirmed that they were lying to the IMAB process, lying to First Nations, lying to British Columbians. And this is what the minister points to as what is going to be a foundational piece going forward on the Aquaculture Act. This tells me that the conflict of interest is alive and well. It tells me that the Department of Fisheries and Oceans has forgotten this fact right here. Their primary responsibility is the environment and wild fish. They've lost the script. They've lost the respect of First Nations. They're losing all credibility. And now we have the Cohen Recommendation 19. Deadline is coming up in 8 days. Will the minister implement it and remove Discovery Islands fish farms? We've also had another science paper that clearly points out that industry is underreporting their sea lice counts, which heightens the risk to wild salmon juveniles when they're escaping and going to the ocean. Again, no faith in the Department of Fisheries and Oceans and the regulatory structures, no faith in how they approach any kind of monitoring of this industry, no faith in how it is that they look after wild salmon. It is no surprise that we have the returns to the Fraser that we do. DFO's lost the script. It's time to bring in all First Nations from across this province, all the people that make a living from this resource, to articulate the path to rehabilitate wild salmon. DFO has lost all my respect. DFO has lost the script. It's time for us to take a different path. Now, I often tell people, don't mistake my passion for anger. I'm not saying that anymore. I'm angry. I don't like what's happening to the wild salmon in British Columbia. I don't like that my aunties and my great aunts and uncles are not able to eat the foods that they have their entire lives. That really pisses me off. And we have to stand up now, or we're not going to have this resource for our grandchildren. Now, Karen?
Good morning, and thank you for the welcome to the territory. My name is Karen Riston. I'm the Executive Director at Living Oceans Society. Excuse me. It was almost 2 years ago that Living Oceans published a report we called Lousy Choices. In that one, we detailed how the parasitic sea lice that are bred on salmon farms on this coast had become uncontrolled. They're developing resistance to the only drug that's approved for use out here to treat them. We raised concerns at that time that there was no alternate treatment in place that could be effective. Subsequent to that, all of the companies announced that they were buying equipment, fancy new, very expensive boats that would be capable of administering bath treatments to the fish, that is, non-drug treatments. So this year, we looked at how effective those treatments have been at controlling sea lice on the farms, because controlling it on the farms is critical to protecting the juvenile wild salmon as they exit their rivers in the spring. What we found, looking at now fully 2 years of treatment with these alternate methods, bath treatments in boats, is that they don't work. The level at which DFO has set permissible sea lice, 3 lice per fish, is quite simply too high for these bath treatments to work. The result was most of the salmon farms on the coast were out of control and with devastating impacts on the wild out-migrating juveniles. I didn't do this work, but Alex Morton and her team at Salmon Coast Field Station did the very hard work of finding and counting the lice on those outmigrating juvenile salmon. She found, with respect to Fraser River sockeye, that 99% of the outmigrating juveniles were infected with lice at levels that would probably kill them. That's simply unacceptable. The Cohen Commission said that if Fraser River sockeye were being more than minimally affected, the salmon farms in the Discovery Islands region should be closed by September 30th of this year. That's the recommendation that we're asking the government to act on immediately. I'm very pleased to be standing together with commercial fishermen and the nations to demand this action from government. Thank you.
Thanks, folks. Really appreciate Bob for organizing this and his passion as well. Wow, time really flies. I'm going to say that my name is Stan Probosh. I'm the science advisor for Watershed Watch. And Watershed Watch was quite involved in the Cohen Commission, which was launched 11 years ago. And myself and my colleague, Dr. Craig Orr, spent 2 years of our lives dedicated to the Cohen Inquiry. Yeah, so it's quite incredible to see that we're almost at recommendation 19's deadline now. So just a bit of context, in 2009, there was approximately 5 million sockeye salmon predicted to return, and about 1.5 million actually did. So fast forward to this year, you could see the magnitude of the decline continuing. We're expecting about 100,000 fish to return this year. So it's quite shocking. And I just want to touch on 2 specific recommendations of the 75 that were tabled in 2012. And the total cost, as a reminder, of this federal inquiry, including the costs of the agency's time and being involved, cost taxpayers $37 million over a 2-year period. So it's quite significant. And we all thought that would be an investment in protecting wild salmon for the future. One of the recommendations not mentioned yet today, I think, is number 3. And just to kind of paraphrase, Justice Cohen essentially found the agency responsible for, the protection of wild fish, DFO, as having a potential conflict of interest, whereby, as Bob has talked about, they're supposed to protect wild stocks, but at the same time, he suggested that their promotion of the salmon farming industry may be a problem, and it may cause their ability to protect wild fish to be hampered. So that recommendation essentially says that DFO has to remove that promotional mandate of salmon farms and the product out of DFO. And I'm not really sure of any evidence that has happened. So I think, in my opinion, that's a failed recommendation that Prime Minister Trudeau promised to act on. He promised to act on all 75 recommendations. And then the recommendation, obviously, that we're focusing on today is number 19, which essentially says that by September 30th, 18 salmon farms in the Discovery Islands, which is a migratory bottleneck for sockeye migrating out of the Fraser River, they have to pass through this area. They have to be removed unless DFO deems them of minimal risk. And so I'm going to suggest that between now and the deadline, we may see DFO come out with an announcement. And the recommendation also states that they need to publish the information that they relied on their website. So we may see that. But in the time that this recommendation was tabled, there's been a fair bit of science that has concluded that salmon farms are of an elevated risk to wild fish. Around sea lice, it's quite clear that farms amplify parasite levels and can spread them to wild fish. And particularly in the case of sockeye, they can cause their growth and feeding to be impeded. So there's also been a number of papers around the impacts of pathogens on wild salmon as well since that time. So I think I would like to see a precautionary approach taken by DFO in the next few days to remove these farms. And I don't think anyone in this room is going to be satisfied with anything but. And the last thing I would like to see is, unfortunately, what we've seen in the past, delay strategies, more studies that need to be conducted, more committees that are organized. So I think if we see something like that, we can't be happy with that. So just in conclusion, again, thanks, Bob, for all your work organizing this. And yeah, we really need to see action in removing these 18 farms from the Discovery Islands. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? My name is Craig Orr. I'm a jaded conservation advisor with Watershed Watch Salmon Society. I wasn't going to say anything because I'm not participating as much anymore, but I've been involved in the issue of sea lice since the first outbreak on this coast in 2001. I participated in the Cohen Inquiry as an expert witness. I've helped organize 7 international workshops on impacts of salmon farms with Simon Fraser University, and I've sat on several graduate committees of students working on sea lice. But when I went and sat on an area-based management group with DFO this year to help reform some regulations, I tried to point out that the regulations should include not only the salmon louse, Leptoptera salmonis, but the non-specialist louse that found on herring and things like that, Caligus clemensi, because a graduate student, a committee I just sat on, showed that they were having population level impacts on sockeye salmon, population level impacts. Yet DFO refused to consider them for regulation. They think that there's not a problem with them because their scientists haven't shown that there's a problem with them. They refuse to believe the academic science. Very frustrating, very frustrating. I spent 10 years in Broughton trying to reduce lice impacts as well. And as soon as the NGOs left the process, the impacts came back. So I'm really, really pleased to see Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, many members of Stowell Tribal Council, and Lakatma. All you guys have the power. You have the power. And that was evident when we helped Bob remove those farms from the Broughton Archipelago. So the jaded guy gets a little bit more hope back, thanks to you guys. 101 First Nations, truly amazing. So we're losing our salmon, your culture, our rights to fish. It's really frustrating to be involved in it so long, but it's heartening to see so many new participants who have influence, who have power, and have the desire to spend their time on this issue. So let's get the farms out. And thank you for giving me some hope again. Appreciate it.
We have Kristen Muka, going to speak on behalf of the Wilderness Tourism Association. I always tell people own it like Elvis.
Hello, everyone. As Bob said, my name's Kristen Muka. I own a company called Wild Coast Adventures. Our company is a kayaking wilderness adventure company. It's located on Quadra Island in the Discovery Islands. I also sit on the board of the Wilderness Tourism Association. Wilderness tourism, I got into it because I'd been on a trip up into that area, and I was fascinated by the whales, the wildlife, the seals, the otters, everything. And all of those things wouldn't be there if we didn't have the salmon. And my passion turned into wanting to be a bigger part of it by owning a company that could bring others there. We bring people from across Canada, from around the world, who all come to see all the amazing things that the salmon enable us to have here in BC. And so we find it so important to add our voice from all the Wilderness Tourism Association companies and beyond to this incredibly important cause. I love salmon, I know all of you do, and we stand with all of these Indigenous partners in supporting and the commercial fishery people and their strong statements about you don't need to be a scientist to see what's going on here. It's so obvious and it's so important. Thank you.
I want to thank everyone that's made time to be here today. I want to thank the media for attending. I want to thank everyone that's joined in on the Zoom as well as monitoring or watching it on YouTube. The question that we need to pose to the politicians in Ottawa, primarily our Prime Minister and the Minister of DFO, if you do not enact Cohen Recommendation 19, if you do not transition open net cage fish farms to land-based closed containment, just who are you listening to? Today, we've had the First Nation Leadership Council of British Columbia speak on this issue. We've had Supreme Court of Canada, Sparrow Decision Community speak, the other nations here at the mouth of the Fraser and the Capilano River, 101 First Nations supporting land-based closed containment, commercial fishermen, sport fishermen, wilderness tourism, NGOs, Prime Minister Trudeau, and Minister Jordan. You need to listen to the voice of British Columbia here, all of British Columbia. It's time to quit this game, the charade that you play with science. It's time to quit supporting an industry that is undermining the primary responsibilities that you hold to this country and to the salmon and to all that rely upon a healthy and abundant wild salmon stocks. This is an important day today. This is a time when we have an unprecedented number of voices coming together. And in all honesty, in the past, we've been at odds with one another on different topics. Today, we're unified. Today, we have a clear voice for the government to do what's right for wild salmon. I'm going to hold this hat up again. Wild first, wild first, wild first. And the last thing I'll say is one of the reasons that I got a text saying it looks like a MAGA, Make America Great Again. It's not. This is what we all need to be having when we meet with the minister, to always remind her of the primary responsibilities the Department of Fisheries Oceans has, and that's to the environment and wild salmon. Again, I want to thank everyone for being here today, and hopefully we'll get together and have a celebration all 6 feet apart on September 20th after the call for the close of the fish farms. Thank you, everyone. Gaelic Asa.